Welcome into another edition of the Going Deep Buffalo podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Siracuse, alongside the fill-in co-host tonight, Lance Nelson. Lance, I appreciate you for filling in last minute here. How you doing?
Doing well. Yeah, it's good. Already had the prep work going for what we want to talk about, so glad that I could jump in and be here with you.
All right. Well, again, thank you for coming in on short notice. Before we get going tonight, I want to thank our sponsors for making tonight's show possible. The Summit Center, they do some great work for autism awareness. Also, Dave Dengler and the Larson Timko-Funeral Home. Larson Timko-Funeral Home offering 100% fully guaranteed price and pre-arranged funeral plans with live streaming available. You can visit their website at larsontimkofuneralhome.com or give them a call at 679-9000. So, Lance, we have Joe Brady's press conference to talk about tonight. And then I want to transition that and talk about some potential free agents that the Bills could sign because Saturday is the famous June 1st. And everyone's been talking about that ever since Trey White got released because that's when that $10.2 million kicks in and the Bills will have that freed up on their cap. So before we get into it, do you have any beginning thoughts between that $10.2 million, free agency as a whole, or what Joe Brady had to say and how maybe those two can link together?
Yeah, for sure. I think that, he said something about, as many Curtis Samuels as you can have on the team, the better. And I'm not sure if there's a ton of guys out there that fit the mold of Curtis Samuel on the free agent market. So I kind of wanted to come in and push a little bit of what Kevin Massare been saying. And, that trade maybe for Deebo Samuel looks like a pretty good fit if you're looking for guys that can kind of do it all like Curtis Samuel can. Deebo Samuel will obviously fit that role too if they decided. Wouldn't be my first pick for a target in the trade, just he's getting older as well, and the money you have to spend, I'd rather spend it on a guy that's younger, maybe T. Higgins or Brandon Ayuk. But I think for me it bodes more towards giving the Bills leg into a trade rather than maybe a free agent signing.
So do you think that that could still be in the works here? Do you think that the Bills could actually acquire someone like Deebo Samuel as soon as this weekend?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility. I think they've kept the dialogue open since the draft, and I think they, Brandon Beane's one to always be on the phone and have the conversations for every possibility that could be out there. So for me, I don't know if it's definitely the right move to go and try to get another big contract wide receiver, but it certainly couldn't hurt to have a true kind of number one guy like they've had in Diggs for all these years. So I think it's possible.
This actually worked out well. I'm glad you're here tonight because I don't want to sound redundant because I've been talking about this right along. So now we can kind of get a fresh perspective on things. But have you happened to see any of the content that I've been creating between the Built in Buffalo network channel and my YouTube channel? Because we've been talking about this, Kevin and I, the last couple of weeks, and we've been talking about these philosophical changes. And as weird as this may sound, I think Chase Claypool and Marquez Valdez-Scantling are kind of like the exclamation points here, the cherry on top, if you will. So as soon as the Bills signed MVS, I said, okay, they're done. Here we go. So I really think that this team is done. And I think that there's going to be another position that could get addressed. And we'll get into that later on the show tonight. But I really think that this wide receiver room is set.
Yeah, I would be happy with what we have. I don't think we need to trade for wide receivers. So don't get me wrong. I don't think that I said we need to. I'm just thinking that if they wanted to, I wouldn't necessarily have an issue with it. Kevin Massare has been saying, and I've been paying attention to what you guys have been saying. I think that if Kevin Massare is hearing that these conversations are being had and that it's still a possibility, then I'm going to agree with that. I think it's something I'm not going to downplay. I think it would be just like Joe Brady said it, give me as many Curtis Samuels as I can have on this team. So that would be another option, another guy to come in and compete. I don't think it's necessary either. I can agree with that approach as well. I just think that, you still, if you have the opportunity to bring in like T. Higgins or Brandon Ayuk, you're not going to say no to that, right? I mean, are you guys out there in the comments, are you turning down a possibility of acquiring Higgins or Ayuk? Is that not intriguing anymore? To me, it's still something I would look into. But he spoke on Joe Brady spoke on the fact that this is going to be a little bit of a different approach. He's going to have to figure out how teams are going to play the Buffalo Bills this year without that definitive number one target in what was Stephon Diggs. So it's definitely possible that they're all set as well. I'm cool with that if that's their approach. I think we'll talk about a couple other positions later on that we think could be signed or could be added to in free agency.
Well, before I give my take and we get into it here, I just want to remind everyone to make sure you smash that subscribe and that like button here so that we can keep creating this content for you guys. And that being said, Lance, so the philosophical changes that I see here are that the Bills want to be more well balanced this year. Essentially, I think that they want to do what they did at the end of last year when Joe Brady took over for Ken Dorsey, and now they have pieces to put that into play here. And I was trying to read into his press conference yesterday, and he didn't really say anything that stood out. I mean, he talked about certain players and talked about the communication and how they want to be able to openly communicate, and they want to feel comfortable enough to where each position group can talk to one another and say, hey, I think this is working well. I think we need to work on this. We can adjust this. So he gave little nuggets here and there. But the one thing that stood out to me is that he said, we want to be a two-dimensional offense. And he said right at the beginning, this offense runs through Josh Allen. And I think putting 2 and 2 together, I think that is the track that I've been on, saying that this is a team that wants to use a running game to set up the passing game. Because before, Ken Dorsey just wanted to throw it all over teams, and the defense started picking up on it. And not only with the Bills, you saw teams like Kansas City, Cincinnati, maybe even Justin Herbert. Opposing defenses would say, okay, we're just going to play back too high cover shell because we know that you guys are trying to take the top off. So I think what Brady's saying is, let's make them respect this running game. Let's work underneath with the shifty guys like Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, KJ Hamler. We're going to run 12 personnel with our 2 tight ends. And then once you get the defense to come up and suck in, that's when you can take the top off. And I think that's why someone like MVS makes perfect sense. So that's how I see it. And the reason I brought up Chase Claypool as well is because I saw all those wide receivers that the Bills were either signing or drafting. And there are 4 or 5 receivers now who have that 6'4", 220 plus build. So those are the guys who are going to help in the run blocking game. And then they can also use their size to their advantage in the receiving game. So that was like the main thing that stood out to me, is that I think Brady is on the same line that or maybe I should say the same wavelength that Brady is. And I hope I'm reading this correctly. And I think that's why I believe, and I think it was Steve here. Yeah, Steve said in the comments, we don't really need that wide receiver one because it's going to be a wide receiver by committee approach. And you're going to have so many different pieces between the running backs, the tight ends, and the receivers that as much as we're going to miss Stephon Diggs, I don't think we're going to actually miss him that much once the season gets going.
Right. So how many receivers do you think they'll carry on game days now? Do you think they go up to 7 receivers on game days that are going to dress because they want to have all these different pieces to be able to utilize in their offense throughout the game?
Well, it's going to come down to a numbers game. We talked about this last week, and if they really value that running back position, you might see someone like a Darrington Evans or Frank Gore Jr. make it, and maybe the Bills only carry 5 wide receivers, and someone like Justin Shorter or Chase Claypool is on the outside looking in. I think right now, I would be comfortable with saying that the Bills will carry 4 running backs, probably 3 tight ends, and 6 wide receivers. And I think that 6 wide receiver spot is going to be between Claypool and Shorter. And
Does the
to
4 running
Roy's,
backs include Gilliam or no?
yeah, so Reggie Gilliam, I mean, he could be a fullback or a tight end, kind of that Swiss Army knife. And to Roy's comment here, I mean, I it's going to be tough. KJ Hamler would be the exception. Like if they keep 7 wide receivers because they just really value that speed and that elusiveness and the ability to do multiple things and make that defense really try to figure out where they're going to be lining up. If they think that he's a matchup nightmare, then sure, they might keep him. But I don't know, unless he really blows off the brakes here and really impresses in training camp. Right now, I don't see Hamler making it over Justin Shorter or Chase Claypool.
Yeah, I think it's going to be hard pressed. That other people have moved on from him as well since he was drafted, and it's not to say that he can't take a second chance and make the best of it. Going to root for all these guys to be the best players they can because that's only going to make the team better. But yes, you can only keep so many, so we have to be also a little bit realistic here and seeing, which guys are going to make it. It's going to be even more difficult when you bring in MVS and Chase Claypool now for guys like Hamler to beat those other guys out. I just from a perspective where I'm sitting, I would think that Claypool is going to give us a better chance to win on Sunday than Hamler, but who knows? I'm not there every day, and Hamler's going to work his tail off, I'm sure, to try to make sure he's the best option that he can be for the team.
And to John's comment here, I mean, yeah, coaches like Tyrell Shavers too. I mean, there are a lot of options, and that's what's going to make this very interesting. Now, let me ask you this. What is the order of the wide receiver depth chart, in your opinion, Lance? Because Kevin and I came up with it last week where we see it as, I guess, Coleman would be wide receiver 1, just because you think that the Gabe Davis replacement, I thought at first that it was Coleman, but then you say, okay, they signed Claypool and MVS. Those are kind of like those Gabe Davis replacements. Mac Hollins, too, if you want him, although he's more of like that Jake Kumaro type. So maybe I shouldn't lump him in there. But we kind of narrowed it down, and you can check this out on the Built in Buffalo YouTube channel, or YouTube page, I should say, as we cut this clip up from last week if you guys want to go back and check that out. But what we came up with is Keon Coleman is a wide receiver 1, Curtis Samuel 2, Khalil Shakir 3, because we think he's going to be heavily used in the slot. And then we have MVS at wide receiver 4, Mac Hollins wide receiver 5, because we think that he really has that niche, that carved out role where he can help in the blocking and special teams. And as I alluded to, it's going to come down to Claypool and Shorter for wide receiver 6. And then if you want to throw in Andy Isabella and KJ Hamler, they're sitting there as well.
Yeah, I mean, I see as Curtis Samuel 1, Shakir 2, Keon Coleman 3. You can put MVS maybe at 4, and then Mac Hollins from there. 6, yeah, Claypool is fine with me, and you go on there. I think that's the order I see it in. Given that Keon Coleman's a rookie, I just don't think they're handing him the keys right away, and I think they really love what Samuel and Shakir can do. I think they have familiarity with what Samuel can do from previous stops, and they also obviously know Shakir from last year. So for me, I think Samuel and Shakir are going to get the benefit of the doubt. I'm not saying from Keon Coleman being wide receiver 3 that he's going to be in the slot necessarily. I know that's probably a correlation people make sometimes when they see wide receiver 3. I'm just saying in the pecking order, I think it's Samuel, Shakir, Coleman, and then you have MVS and Mac Hollins. Those are the 5 that I see on the roster, no doubt. And then you go from there to see who gets a 6th or 7th spot. And I actually think they're gonna have to go lighter on some position, because if they're looking to roll out a wide receiver by committee, I think you just have to have 7 guys. I'm not sure how 6 fits if you're really going to roll out, like I said, a committee of guys. You're going to want to have as many options to keep them as fresh as possible throughout the game. So that's why I asked the question about how many you think they're going to keep, because I just think it's going to have to be more than the traditional 5 or 6. I think they're going to have to go 7 and be deeper. And that opens up a spot for a guy like Shorter or Hamler. And as Steve's mentioning in the comments here, special teams going to play into that. So some of those guys are going to be maybe a special teamer that also could play receiver, but maybe a guy that was defensive back or a linebacker that was kept for special teams. Maybe that spot gets replaced by a receiver now who's also going to play some special teams, but can come in and do some specific things. Shorter kind of screams that to me, because he probably could play special teams and then go out and be a red zone target when they get down there. He doesn't need to play when the Bills are in open field, but when they get down in the red zone, he can be a guy that goes in and be a pass catching option.
Well, Roy says here, with 2 pass catching tight ends, 2 pass catching running backs, I would even go as far as saying 3 or 4 because Ray Davis led the nation, at least college running backs, in receiving touchdowns. He says, I wouldn't be shocked if they only go with 5 wide receivers. I mean, same here. That's why I'm going in the middle and saying 6. But to your point, Lance, I would hate to see them give up. Let's just say they keep Chase Claypool as wide receiver 6, and you're looking at a similar situation as what we saw a couple years ago when they kept someone like Tyler Matakevich. And I like Matakevich. So maybe I shouldn't use him for this, but I'm just saying a special teamer. They kept,
Yeah.
3 or 4 special teamers like Tywan Jones. Maybe that's a better example. They kept Tywan Jones, and then they got rid of Isaiah Hodgins, and then he turned into a very nice player for the Giants. And, he's not like a Pro Bowl or an All Pro or anything right now, but I just don't want that to happen when you have a young, promising wide receiver with upside and size, and you keep someone like that Tywan Jones and say, okay, Justin Shorter, if you have to go to another team, then so be it. It's a numbers game and we can't keep you. And then you're going to look 2 years down the road and say, man, we really should have kept him because we valued special teams too much. So that's why I think it's good that someone like Mac Hollins can play special teams because he's filling 2 roles in one. Like I don't
Right.
really subscribe to keeping guys who are just there for special teams.
Yeah, that's got to change now. They don't have the top end skill position, especially at the wide receiver. I guess they don't have that number one guy. That's kind of this guy's always going to be on the field, so you have less snaps to fill at wide receiver. Now, when you're talking about a committee of guys, you're just going to have to get those guys on for more snaps on offense, and it's going to be tough to dedicate people just to special teams. The more and more they transition through this roster turnover to get to the younger and cap compliant type roster they're looking for.
So let me go back to this again because I know I talked about it a few minutes ago, but I just want to make sure we're on the same page. So do you agree with how I see this with that philosophical change? Do you agree that they are going to be a well-balanced offense and they're going to use a running game to set up the passing game? Because I think it's different than being a run-heavy team. Like, I don't think this is going to be the Baltimore Ravens. And I mean, Lamar does get his passes in, so maybe that's not the best example, but you know what I mean? Like, I don't think that this is going to be a team that runs the ball 60 or 70% of the time and they only throw it 30 or 40% now. Like, they still have Josh Allen, as Joe Brady said. So I think it really is going to be like 52-48, maybe even 51-49, 50-50. Like, I think it's going to be very strategic, I guess, is how I would say it. Like, I think it does depend on game flow. Like if the passing game is working, they're going to go with that. Same with the running game. But when it's all said and done, I really see this being like a 50-50 split between the running game and the passing game. Would you agree?
Yeah, that's kind of what he said, trying to be two-dimensional as much as possible. And he used the term intentional a lot in his press conference. So, being intentional about the plays they're calling. He talked about really enjoying the play calling aspect of the role at OC. And I think that's going to really set the Bills up well because he said also you have to continue to evolve what they did last season and you can't continue to do the same things. So if he's going to continue to evolve, when he was talking about James Cook's usage, actually, so if you're going to continue to evolve that running game and that usage of your running backs, I think that lends itself to agree exactly with what you said because you're going to have to figure out ways to catch the other team off guard. And one of the things that I was critical of last season was being too predictable in certain situations. And then when they weren't being predictable, they couldn't execute the little cute plays that they tried. So when they had like Diggs in the backfield and tried a little swing pass and stuff, just those things just didn't seem to click. And now they have guys who are better suited for those roles. Maybe a guy like Curtis Samuel who can execute that play a little bit better, whereas Diggs maybe wasn't necessarily the right fit for doing that. But they tried it, and that's all good. But I think now they're going to be a little bit more diverse in their offense. They're going to have Ray Davis, who's just a different back. He can kind of do everything you ask him. He's going to be in the Latavius Murray role in the passing situations, probably because of his ability to pass block. Although I'd like to see, given our running back's ability to catch the ball, you have Cook and Ty Johnson and now Ray Davis, who all can catch the ball in the backfield. I'd like to see less plays where you are relying on a running back to block, because those guys are actually really good playmakers. So I agree. You're going to have to be balanced. You're going to have to be two-dimensional. And he said as much in his press conference that, as long as these guys can handle the workload, then, they're going to be used to the best ability to keep the offense two-dimensional.
One other note that I do want to make is when we were putting the order of those wide receivers in, I think it's as much as we're saying Keon Coleman is wide receiver one, I think that you should put an asterisk by that because he might be wide receiver one on the depth chart, but for targets, I think the actual wide receiver one is going to be Dalton Kincaid. I think this offense is going to start with Kincaid and kind of matriculate its way out. So when I said that Keon Coleman is wide receiver one, and Kevin would agree with me, we kind of talked about this. It was just kind of like process of elimination where we got down to Keon Coleman as wide receiver one. And I think he agreed with me. And I said, I really don't see him leading this team in targets. I think that's going to be Kincaid. And then maybe even Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir. But again, I'm putting Shakir as that wide receiver three because I think the Bills will line him up in the slot. And Brandon Beane has said that before, that their slot receivers are viewed as wide receiver three. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot that goes into that because Keon Coleman might be fourth in targets, but on the depth chart, he might be listed first, if that makes sense.
Yeah, according to PFF, Khalil Shakir's percentage of snaps out wide increased towards the end of last season. So I think actually Shakir is going to play a little bit more outside than people might think, and I think he's going to lead the wide receiver group in targets. Kincaid, I agree, is going to be the main target on offense as far as any pass catcher, tight ends included. But when you're just talking about wide receivers, I really think Shakir is going to get the heaviest load of targets this year. I think they really are going to try to lean on him and see how he can take that next step and grow. And they talked about, how he's going to need to continue and grow and develop in the press conference. Joe Brady said he really likes his intelligence, the feel of zones, the feel for the man coverage. And he was very complimentary in Shakir in his press conference. Obviously, he's not going to bash any player in a press conference at this point, but I just think that the way he spoke about Shakir makes me think that he may be actually more in line for the most targets of any wide receiver on this team moving forward.
Okay, so you think that Shakir is going to lead this wide receiver room?
I do. I think Curtis Samuel's gonna be labeled as wide receiver one, but I think that Shakir gets the most targets at the end of the year.
I mean, I could see that because there's no like clear cut top dog, like if Diggs was here, you would say it's Diggs no matter what. But again, like I don't know if Coleman is going to go for 1,000 yards as a rookie. I don't know if Samuel is because I think they're going to use him as like that gadget type player, and that's why I don't know if Curtis Samuel can be wide receiver one in terms of targets or on the depth chart, just because I think they're going to use him in a multitude of ways. So, I mean, I could see that with Shakir. And again, that I just listed him there because he is going to be in the slot. But I guess that's a good segue because Joe Brady did say that they view him as that wide receiver who can do a little bit of everything. And to your point, maybe they do take him out of the slot a little bit and say, we'll put him on the boundary and maybe we'll put Coleman in the slot and he can become that big slot receiver. Or you put Curtis Samuel in the slot, or if Isabella or Hamler make the team, you could slide them in there.
And you're going to
Maybe
have
James
Kincaid in
Cook.
the slot as well. You're going to have, maybe Knox in line with Kincaid in the slot.
Yeah, I was gonna say Cook, Kincaid. So I think they just want to create these nightmares, and that's why it's so hard to figure out the depth chart and the order and who's going to make the team and how are they going to really revolve this offense. But I think when it's all said and done, basically, I think as we've been saying, it's going to be well balanced, two dimensional, and they're going to use that running game to set up the passing game. And then once that defense can converge and they suck in and respect that running game, that's when you take the top off with MVS, or you make those separation issues look better with Keon Coleman down the sideline, or in terms of what we were just talking about, you go up the seam to Kincaid. And someone said in the comments, can Kincaid get 1,000 yards? I mean, I think that's going to be easy
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
him this year based on how I think the Bills will use him.
By week 14, he'll have 1,000 yards probably. I don't know. He's just, I
Ooh.
see just like, you know, um, he's gonna have to. He's gonna have to produce, and I don't think they're gonna be shy. They weren't shy last year with him being a rookie, breaking a lot of rookie franchise records, and I think they're going to continue that. But I also think they're going to continue that with Shakir too. I think that those two guys being here last year and being the only, only couple of guys, I guess, Knox and those folks also caught balls from Josh Allen. But Brady mentioned in his conference that there's only one guy in the receiving room that's caught a ball from Josh Allen, and that's Khalil Shakir. So I think that my interpretation is that I think that Shakir is going to be asked to do more than people might think. But
Well, I was going to say, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about from Joe Brady's press conference? Because I mean, I think we pretty much hit on all the main points. The only other thing is, I touched on this earlier, was that he talked about that open communication, and I think that's important because as much as we're talking about this as a young team from a player point of view and perspective, this team also got younger on the coaching staff with Joe Brady being the offensive coordinator full time. And every time I think about this, it makes me laugh that Joe Brady is younger than Von Miller, to put that into
yeah,
perspective. And now they have Bobby Babbage as the defensive coordinator, along with a lot of assistant coaches who are also pretty young. So not only did the Bills get young on the field, they got young on the sidelines as well.
sure. He talked about communication and collaboration is what's going to lead to success with this offense. So you talked about having guys being comfortable coming to him and being comfortable being open and having the dialogue throughout these practices. And that's the real importance of these practices, is to really get guys comfortable with communicating with one another and giving them the opportunity to build dialogue now and understand how each other communicates and then collaborate on that all together such that they can put this thing together to a successful package. I think he also talked about the offensive line, which we didn't really mention much, and how that's coming together as a new offensive line. They did talk about Cedric Van Pran Granger as well. He talked about being a three-time captain and having just being a great person, having a great personality. So he, has gone up against the best of the best in college, and that's going to set him up to potentially contribute early on. So I just wanted to ask you, how early do you think, and maybe you've said this before, but how early do you think that Van Pran Granger can really make an impact in this roster?
We actually talked about that last week, and we made a clip out of this because we think, Kevin and I, we said that it's either week 1 or next year,
Yeah, I agree.
because I don't think that if this team is a contender like we think, maybe they're not going to win the Super Bowl this year, but if you have Josh Allen, you're automatically a contender, right? You're at least a contender for the AFC East and to win one, maybe two playoff games, and then we'll see from there. Not saying that they can't, but from the outside looking in, it seems like this team took a step back. So we'll just have to see how they get on the field and react to that. Um, but that being said, I don't think that they're in a position where they're going to get to week 10 and say, hey, you know what? Let's make a change at center. I think that they want that continuity from day
Yeah,
one, from week 1. So if Van Pran Granger really impresses over the next couple months and they say, wow, we got to get this guy in the starting lineup. Okay, Connor McGovern, you're back to left guard. David Edwards, you're going to become that swingman again. And Van Pran Granger is your starting center of the future. But if Connor McGovern really impresses and Van Pran Granger isn't ready yet, they'll probably just say, this is your red shirt year. Yeah, you could come in if there's an injury, but we'll probably wait another year and we'll, kick the tires again next summer and we'll see if you can be the starting center in 2025.
yeah, I said the same thing. If you guys haven't yet, go out and tune in to Triple Coverage with myself and Benjamin Shoop and Scott Casson on Friday nights. But I said the same thing on Triple Coverage, was that they're either going to make the move immediately to build the continuity, or they're going to set them and wait. But it's going to be the best 5 offensive linemen on the field that make it. And training camp's going to be so much fun to watch these things take place and see who's getting reps where and with what, first team, second team, and third team reps. So I completely agree that it's week 1 or barring an injury or next year, he'll get his chance because it just has to. The center position is too important to try to change it up midseason or anything like that. There's a potential there if they wanted to do something during the bye week and they think that based upon performance or anything, it would be best to have that McGovern move to left guard and they can bring in SVPG into center. But I think that would have, the bye week may be an opportunity if there's like poor performance or maybe a guy's nursing an injury and they just need to give him a break, where they could implement Van Pran Granger at the center position. But it's not something like you said that's going to happen week 10 out of the blue, but we're just going to change it in a week.
And that'd be tough, even that, like during the bye week where
It
you're
would.
going in between Kansas City and San Francisco, and that's really going to be that tough stretch run. And if you're going to insert that rookie, I don't know. I just don't see it being likely because we know how the Bills slow play their rookies. So I really think it's either going to be week 1 or 2025.
I agree with it. I mean, like I said, barring injuries, if they need to do something, if someone's just not cutting it, and the best 5 linemen they can put out there is with Van Pran Granger at center and McGovern at left guard, or however they may need to shuffle things. I don't know. That's going to depend on performance and injuries. We got so lucky with the offensive line not being injured last year. I just feel like this year is going to be maybe a challenge in that realm, but I hope not. I hope it continues to be a luck that we have to get all 5 guys out there every game.
And don't forget the Bills also signed Will Clapp too. And that's good veteran insurance because as much as we're saying there could be an injury, well, to my point, if they want to slow play Van Pran Granger, they might say, you know what? Will Clapp is more equipped to take over for McGovern in a pinch.
That's 100% right. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. But I guess I'm more hopeful. I think that it was just such a good draft pick where they were able to draft Van Pran Granger that it breeds so much excitement into me and in the fan base. I think getting a guy that maybe could have gone, I don't know. I think some people had him even as a second round talent, and you get him in the 5th. So
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I really like the idea of getting a guy like this in the room because not only was he a 3-year captain or was it 3-year
yep,
starter?
3-year captain and starter.
4-year starter, 3-year captain.
Yep.
And he got a lot better and he progressed over time in both the run game and the passing game. And he's a leader, and it just seems like he has the physical traits that you would need, and he's very smart. And not only that, he did not allow a sack. His pressure rate was really good. But the couple of nuggets that I really like is that he blocked for James Cook. So they already had that chemistry working together. And on top of it, he went up against guys like Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter in practice.
Yeah.
So I think that this could turn out to be a home run of a pick.
For sure. I agree with that. Last thing I have on the Joe Brady press conference is just, a lot of the way he carried himself, the way he spoke, I think was not, I don't know if I was surprised, but I just was appreciative that he was like, at being so young, he was very much carrying himself like even maybe a head coach would in answering a lot of questions. So I wanted to get your opinion on that. He said a lot of things about, hey, we're going to have to see, we don't have a game tomorrow, those kind of things. And we're just going to kind of wait and see how things develop here. He was very professional and almost had a head coach presence about him when he gave this press conference. How did you see that?
Yeah, I think Joe Brady's very well spoken. And one other thing that I'll say, tying this back in with our previous conversation, is that I think that helps with the players because if you have a young roster, I think it makes sense that you want to have young coaches because on one hand, you say, like, take the Sabres, for example, not to switch sports, but you have a young roster and you say, okay, we need an old experienced coach in Lindy Ruff to get these guys going and to hold them accountable and to get them into the playoffs. But I think it would work in this case because if you have a young roster, you want to be able to relate to these guys. And I think Joe Brady can do that. Not saying that, someone like Ken Dorsey or Brian Dable couldn't because, I mean, they're not that much older. But take Bobby Babbage, for example. Maybe he can relate to the defensive players better than his dad did because he is a generation younger. And just something as small as being on social media and understanding the lingo and how these guys talk and communicate, and like how you can relate to them. Instead of just being like the old structured way, now you can just be like, "Yo, come here. I got to tell you something." Like, "Yo, bro." Just small things like that I think could go a long way.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's exciting because the communication he's preaching is so important. Just flows better between player and coach, and then hopefully goes the same way between players as well, where you have enough mixture of veterans and young players that they're able to, out the way each other communicates, and be able to take that for what it's worth. The thing he said about Keon Coleman being able to take coaching and teaching and just apply it and not really get discouraged or not really have any negative reaction to that was pretty cool too. Keon Coleman, I gotta say I was dead wrong about Keon Coleman. We'll see how his game on the field translates, but I just was not my top choice for the Bills to pick at receiver, and he's been nothing but a joy to have on this team since they drafted him.
I would agree with that. And before we transition here, just to put a cap on this talk, Von Miller turned 35 years old on March 26th. Joe Brady doesn't turn 35 until September 23rd, just to put that
There you
into
go.
perspective. So, okay, now transitioning to part 2 of the show tonight. And again, make sure you smash that like and subscribe button here. Kevin Siracuse alongside Lance Nelson with you tonight on Going Deep Buffalo on the one and only Built in Buffalo network. So, Lance, it is May 29th, Wednesday, that is. Saturday is June 1st. That is when the Bills get that $10.2 million coming in from Trey White's release. Do you think that they spend that on someone? Or do you buy into what Brandon Beane says, where he's like, no, well, we're just going to use that on the rookies. We need to be cap flexible, and we need to be able to have enough money to, if we have to shuffle the roster and just bring in a couple of back end guys, then we have that flexibility to do so. Or are you under the impression that they could go make a Leonard Floyd type signing, or they could go make a trade for Brandon Ayuk work because they have this extra flexibility?
I'm struggling because I really would like to go with the first approach where you're just having the flexibility, saving it. I don't know that you can bring in any one guy at this point and make the team immediately better or move the needle enough to justify spending the asset you need to spend to get the guy. The trade for a Higgins or an Ayuk may be the outlier where I think that immediately makes your team better. You have the ability to go put in, a number one focal point on your offense. Go ahead and do that, like I was talking about earlier. But I really don't see from the free agent market who they're going to bring in with that money that really moves the needle for me. They already made a bunch of depth moves across the defensive line, so I'm not sure that happens. I guess the one guy I would say, and I get your opinion on this or any other edge rusher, is Yannick Ngakoue. Does he move the needle for you if you bring him into this room? Does he give you an upgrade and give you insurance if Von Miller just isn't able to return to his form? Does it kind of give you another veteran presence that says, hey, I can come in and step in during these high leverage situations, high pressure situations?
Yeah, I think it does. And I'm glad you brought this up because I want to talk about this defensive end position because I feel like that's one of the positions that the Bills could go after because that's a position that they covet. And with that rotation, I feel like they are always looking to upgrade here at defensive end. And then B, we don't know what form of Von Miller we're going to get. So you would like to be optimistic and say, okay, we think that Von is going to be back to maybe not his 2015 form, but he can at least give us 8 to 12 sacks. And then you have Greg Rousseau in year 4 now, right? And then they brought
Mm.
back AJ Epinesa. And here's the thing where I'm getting caught up because I think they do have a plan and they like a lot of the guys that they brought in. Someone like Javon Solomon, I think, is perfect. And I think that Von Miller will kind of take him under his wing and he will be a very, very solid pass rusher for years to come. But is there room for another one? Because Casey Toohill, I think that could be a Shaq Lawson upgrade. Dwayne Smoot. I think that could be a sneaky addition. And then they still have guys like Cameron Klein and Kingsley Jonathan. So, I mean, those guys don't necessarily move the needle, but I think they could all provide a role. And if you look at it that way, are you comfortable with the depth chart the way it is? Or would you say, you know what, Yannick Ngakoue does make us better? So if you have the ability to go with someone who can make you better, then do it regardless of how confident we are with the guys on the roster.
Yeah, like I said, I don't think that it necessarily moves the needle because you've got so much depth already there, and the guys that we have were already. So it's going to be what they did already once was they brought in Quintez Cephas, right, and then they released him and just signed MVS when he became available. So then, who are you releasing to bring in another guy? Because I think the roster is about full. If we're not at 90, we're at 89, I think. So who are you replacing with Yannick Ngakoue? And it's not to say replacing these guys with Yannick Ngakoue wouldn't be an upgrade. It would when you're talking about the bottom of the depth chart and defensive end. But I just think that you brought these other guys in for a reason. How much are you going to shuffle that? And is it just, making a move to make a move, or do you really need that? Do you really feel like you need that insurance? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, they could probably just shave off someone from the wide receiver room, someone like Xavier Washington, that UDFA from Ohio State. I heard that my cousin used to go to Ohio State and he said, check this guy out. He told me before the draft, actually, he's like, someone to watch here is Xavier Washington because his numbers don't pop, but whenever they needed a big time play or a big catch, it would go in his hands.
Mhm.
So I don't want to just totally disregard him right now because we still have the whole summer. But I think someone like that, you could shave off the roster spot and say, okay, we'll just try to get this guy back on the practice squad. Because again, if we can get someone like Yannick Ngakoue, then do it. Two other names, Carl Lawson and Emmanuel Agba. I think those are two names to look out for as well.
Yeah, again, I don't know necessarily how much it does for me personally. I'm not saying they couldn't be an upgrade and couldn't be good. I just don't know. I would rather have the flexibility with the cap maybe than maybe that's just the way I'm thinking is like, okay, we have this flexibility now. Are we going to try to make a splash? Or are we going to need it to sign some guys next year that are coming up? Greg Rousseau's coming up on his end of his deal. We may need to get an extension done with him, and who else you're going to have to pay with that money internally versus bringing someone in from external when you already made a lot of signings that give you good enough depth to be competitive, in my opinion.
Just a quick correction here. It's Xavier Johnson. I said Xavier Washington, but that's a wide receiver from Ohio State. And yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those where if they sign someone, I'm not going to be mad. But if they don't, I'm also not going to be mad. Like it's
Right.
just kind of one of those where it's like, whatever you got to do, Because we're thinking that Dwayne Smoot could be a nice sneaky addition. But what if he underperforms and they say, you know what? Let's just get rid of Smoot because we like Casey Toohill, we like Javon Selman, we still like Cameron Klein and Kingsley Jonathan, and let's just replace Smoot with Emmanuel Agba if the money's right, or Carl Lawson, or to your point, Yannick Ngakoue.
Yeah, I think I'm exactly where you are. Is if they do something, then I'm going to be, rooting for it and excited about it. But if they don't, I'm going to be okay with it because I think that they've already made, their bed, and I'm okay. They are at 91 right now, and they get the one with Travis Clayton there, but they're already at a full roster. So more and more than I think about it, the more I think it's probably you have to bring in a player that's going to get to the top, a starting caliber player. It's going to be at the top of a position group. And that's either a trade for a wide receiver for me, or we'll talk about this next one. Justin Simmons, free agent safety. What do you think about
Mm.
potential move to bring in a free agent safety? The safety room is one where I know they've added some, but Mike Edwards already out with a shoulder right now. dealing with that kind of stuff should be good for training camp. But do they bring in another guy that's a surefire starter at safety, or do they rock with the room they have, with the depth they have at safety?
Well, before we get into the defensive backfield, let's continue with the defensive line. Let's finish the defensive line because I want to ask you about defensive tackle because
Okay.
I think I'm good here, but I think this should be a quick conversation unless you think that there's someone out there. Yeah, so there you go. You had it loaded up. Other positions. Is defensive tackle on the radar? Because that's another one based on that rotation. We know how the Bills like that presence up front. They're always looking to address that defensive line. Could they get another tackle? Because I think they're set. If you have Daquan Jones and Ed Oliver as your starters, with Austin Johnson and Dwayne Carter as the backups, and then you still have guys sitting behind them on the bench, guys like Deshaun Williams and Eli Anku. I'm pretty good there. Are you?
I'm 100% good. I was raving about when we went over and kind of graded. I did a show with Akeem on the Founders Pod a few weeks back, and we were grading the position groups of where we drafted rookies into. Now you have Dwayne Carter going into there, and then you signed Austin Jackson, and you just there's so much depth on the D tackle room that I am in no way, shape, or form looking to add a free agent at this point. I'm not even sure there's a free agent that makes sense that would be able to compete with these guys. Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, Austin Johnson, Deshaun Williams, now Dwayne Carter coming in. You're not going to carry more than 5 anyway, and then you still have Anku, Rondell Bothroyd, and Branson Dean there, UDFA. So for me, I'm very excited about the way this defensive tackle room is shaped up, and I don't think that you bring in a free agent.
Yeah, I think as much as the Bills want that depth and competition, I don't think that there's a move that makes sense here because looking at the remaining free agents, Fletcher Cox is at the top. Is he a free agent or did he retire?
I think he was retiring. I thought he had retired. I saw him there as well, and I thought he was retired
Yeah,
or
that's
in
what
the
I thought too.
process
I
of
mean, either way, it
retiring.
doesn't make sense for the Bills.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Lawrence Guy is a guy, a guy is a guy
There's a guy.
who I thought made sense going into free agency, but they got Austin Johnson, they drafted Dwayne Carter, and I know that he's over 34 years old, and I think he's
Yeah.
fallen off. Actually, I think he was pretty solid the last few years, but I don't think he's the same Lawrence Guy. So that really doesn't do it for me. I mean, Al Woods, our friend Linval Joseph, Chris Wormley. I thought Wormley's made sense for a few years, but I think he's been dealing with some injuries. And then after that, it's far and few between. So it just doesn't match up. I don't think there's a DT that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree 100%. There's not anyone here that's going to move the needle, and that's my. I guess that's the saying for me right now is if it's not going to move the needle, and I'm not sure a defensive line that there's that many people out there that are going to move the needle from the free agent market.
Now, while we have this tag up here, other positions, I want to go over to the offense because I do want to finish with defensive backs because I think that one is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a wide receiver, a free agent wide receiver that you think makes sense? Or going back to our previous conversation, is this room set based on what Brady wants to do?
Yeah, geez, it's Hunter Renfro is a name that's intriguing. I just why would I guess you've already signed some other guys, like you already signed Curtis Samuel and things like that. So are you really waiting for this post June 1st money to be able to afford Hunter Renfro? I don't know. I don't know. Again, if you bring him in, you're taking someone else out. And I'm just unsure of how many times they're gonna, move pieces like that. Like why would you have brought in some of the receivers that you're gonna maybe have to release if you sign another one now? Like what would be the point of having brought them in for 2 weeks or a month at this point in time? So it's kind of like you brought these guys in because you saw something in them. Are you just gonna do what you did with Quintez Cephas and just release them that quickly? I don't know. For me, I don't see a wide receiver that's like, man, we got to have him, and he would instantly make an impact to the wide receiver room.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think I'm set. Like Hunter Renfro, would he be nice? Yeah, but you have Khalil Shakir, you have other pieces, like you said, Curtis Samuel. Michael Thomas is someone who we've kicked around. We've talked about that possibility, but that was before they drafted Keon Coleman and before they signed guys like Chase Claypool. And I mean, they still had Justin Shorter, Marquez Valdez-Scantling too, if you want it. So I feel like that type of body and receiver is kind of out of the door now. It's out of the picture. I don't really think Michael Thomas makes sense. So again, like I'm struggling to find a route to where the Bills would need a wide receiver. Like, I feel like if they were to get a wide receiver, they would have to pull the trigger on a trade for Brandon Ayuk. Like, go get that wide receiver one, or a Debo Samuel. Because, like, I just don't think that there's a free agent where they would say, oh, Jamal Agnew, perfect. Or Mecole Hardman, Jakeem Grant. I'm looking at the list here. Randall Cobb, Marquise Goodwin. I thought that was intriguing, a reunion, but I know how people feel about reuniting with former players, and they signed MVS for that same role. So Richie James, Laquan Treadwell, Sterling Shepard, Alex Erickson, Byron Pringle. No, thank you.
Yeah, we don't want any Pringles here. Just fat, and we don't want to get fat. No, corny joke. But yeah, I'm set with the receiver room we have. I think we have way more than we're obviously going to be able to keep. We have a lot of young talent as well. So we have some guys that can fill out the practice squad. And I don't see the point of bringing. I saw the point in getting MVS and then dropping Quintez Cephas, but I don't see a point of doing that with any of these other guys, with any of releasing Chase Claypool, let's say, to sign Mecole Hardman or something. Like, I wouldn't understand that really. What would be the point of bringing him in for 2 weeks or a month to just sign another guy right after that? Doesn't make any sense to me. So that's my outlook on it. My perspective is like, why would you have brought these guys in to start learning something and then just immediately move on from them, unless it's for a guy like, obviously MVS is going to make a much bigger impact over Quintez Cephas. I think that you could see that that's pretty obvious. What about running back? Do you think that we're set with all the young running backs that they brought in, or do you think like they could get another veteran that's on the market?
Yeah, I mean, I think this team is set. I mean, I think they have a surplus, and they're going to have to probably get rid of one, if not two, of these guys, considering that they have Reggie Gilliam. So I think you have James Cook, Ray Davis, Ty Johnson, and it's going to be tough for Darrington Evans to make it. Same thing with Frank Gore Jr., and I think he's going to be a camp darling. He's going to be a fan favorite. So, I mean, I think they had that opportunity. They could have signed someone like Zeke Elliott, Rashad Penny, one of those big bruising backs, and they didn't. I'm looking at the list now. Damian Harris, but he retired. Cam Akers, that's interesting. Matt Breida, Kareem Hunt, Latavius Murray, Jerick McKinnon, Marlon Mack, Josh Kelly, Benjamin. I think I'm good, like Kareem Hunt would be
Yep.
interesting, but I feel like he's very similar to James Cook, and I just don't see a spot on this roster for any of these guys.
Yeah, I'm not buying Kareem Hunt from the culture standpoint either. Just not a guy that I would never draft in fantasy football either. Silly as that may sound, but just not the caliber of player that I would want on the Bills. If we're staying with offense, I guess you have more to say on the running back room, but I think we're both pretty good on that. What if, plot twist, they said Connor McGovern's going to be the center this year? What if they sign Connor McGovern, the free agent center, and he becomes the center, and then we have Connor McGovern at left guard and Connor McGovern at center?
The other Connor McGovern?
Yes.
I didn't realize that he's still a free agent. I was going to ask you before we go back to the defense. Offensive line, is that an option? Because, again, I feel like this is a position group that there's a surplus. And, like, I just don't see a route for any of these guys to make the team. Now, you could make a case and say David Bakhtiari or DJ Humphries, Charles Leno, Dwayne Brown, Connor Williams. That could be interesting. but Mason Cole, no thanks. Donovan Smith, like there are some names,
Yep.
but the Bills have their starters. You have Deion Dawkins and Spencer Brown, and then we've talked about all the other guys on the line. We haven't mentioned Osiris Torrance yet, but I think this line is set. They have the depth, they have young talent, they have older talent. I mean, they signed La'el Collins, don't forget, and he has that
Yep.
versatility. I think I'm good here with the offensive line. Are you?
Yeah, 100%. You're like you said at a surplus, and you're talking about great depth that you have, similar with the interior defensive line. We have quality depth right now. There's not really a guy that's going to come in and move the needle, and you already have your starter set. So you're not really going to bring in a guy that's a big name to sit on the bench. So you could probably talk me into somebody if Spencer Brown struggles at all early in the year. Um, but I think the most glaring position of uncertainty right now is a left guard. So if you have a guy that's going to come in and immediately start at left guard with no questions asked, then there's a path there. But otherwise, I don't see a path for someone else. And I'd like giving David Edwards the opportunity and see who else can compete for that spot.
Yeah, and I think Will Clapp can play guard as well. And
Mhm.
they really like Alec Anderson and Ryan Vandermark. I know Vandermark's more of a tackle. Um, and then they also got Tylen Grable too. Now he's more of a tackle. Same with Richard Garage. But the point that I'm trying to make is they have a bunch of bodies. Kevin Jarvis is there again. Gunnar Britton, Mike Edwards, just to round it off. Tommy
My
Doyle coming
guy,
back from
Keaton
that injury.
Bills. Don't forget about Keaton Bills. He's there.
Yes, thank
And
you, Keaton Bills. I mean, he could be a sneaky option here.
yeah, played with Dalton Kincaid obviously at Utah, so there's some familiarity there with. I'm sure Kincaid probably was able to give a little bit of a scouting report to the coaching staff, and we'll see, how well he can impress. Like I said, that left guard position is probably the one that has the most uncertainty, even though David Edwards is probably locked in there to start the preseason. But we'll see where it goes. See how the competition heats up, and if someone else can outperform, I think it'll be tough. But that's the only possible path to a role here with the Bills is at left guard, if any.
Okay, so about an hour into the show, and we are going to finish by talking about a couple of positions that make sense here. And Lance had already mentioned this a few minutes ago, and we want to talk about the other positions because now you can see by process of elimination, wide receiver, maybe, but I don't think it makes sense. Running back, no, they're fine there. Offensive line, they have enough. Quarterback, obviously, you're fine. Defensive end, maybe. Defensive tackle, seems like they're good. Linebacker, we haven't talked about, but I think they're good there. I mean, they have what, 7 or 8 bodies between, Matt Milano, Terrell Bernard, Dorian Williams, who I think is really going to pop off this year. Nicholas Morrow, I thought that was a very smart signing. I think he is a very good veteran. Balin Spector coming into year 3 here. And then they drafted Edifon Ulafosio. They got Joel Andresen, a local product here. And then they signed Deion Jones as well.
Yeah.
So I think that leaves us here with that defensive back room that you alluded to. And start us off, Lance. Tell us why you think someone like Justin Simmons could still make sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to look at who can come in and start right away because we have a couple of guys who are just uncertain. You have Taylor Rapp, who should be penciled in, but it's not like you couldn't get an upgrade to him, and he played well in a kind of reserve rotational role last year, so it doesn't need to be a full-time starter. You have the rookie Cole Bishop, who you're not sure or I'm not sure that he's necessarily going to be ready to roll week one. And then Mike Edwards, you signed, and he's already hurt. So you do have Cam Lewis, DeMar Hamlin, D. Delaney, and Kendall Williamson behind those guys. But I mean, they're just not Justin Simmons, if we're going to be honest with ourselves here. I think that, he, at least for me, commands the respect to say, here's a guy you can bring in right away, and he's your starter.
So let me ask you this. Does Cole Bishop start week 1? I talked about this with Kevin last week. who has a better chance of starting week 1, Cole Bishop or Cedric Van Pran Granger? I think it's got to be Cole Bishop,
Yeah,
right?
Cole Bishop easily has a better chance. In fact, I would say he's more likely than any rookie to start and be penciled in as a starter. I think even over Keon Coleman, just because you do have Curtis Samuel and Khalil Shakir there, and if they do roll out a 12 personnel to start, you could see Samuel Shakir with the two tight ends there, Kincaid and Knox, to start the season. Doesn't necessarily mean Keon Coleman's going to be your starter right away. I think by the end of the year, Keon Coleman's absolutely going to be a starter, and I think he's going to be really, really good in this offense. But I think Cole Bishop is the one guy that's like, all right, he's there, he can plug in and go, and Edwards and Rapp maybe are more of the rotation than Cole Bishop is. But I think those three guys will ultimately be able to rotate through, assuming Mike Edwards is able to get healthy and be part of this rotation. But, he's a guy where you could say, okay, you came in, you have an issue, we're going to upgrade to Justin Simmons and say goodbye to Mike Edwards, let's say, because we know Simmons can come in and play every snap, and there's no issue there.
So you think that they could potentially release Mike Edwards to make room and bring in Justin Simmons?
Yeah, if you're talking about what I'm thinking, how my mind's working and what I'm thinking could happen, that's the possibility I see. I mean, I don't know. Availability is your best ability. They must have known when they signed him. At least I would have hoped they would have known that he was going to have some sort of procedure when they signed him. But you know, when you're talking about who can you sign right now to make the biggest upgrade on your roster at a starting position, Simmons is the best fit for me.
Well, assuming everyone's healthy, the way I see it is Mike Edwards will be the starting free safety. And I think they're going to start with Taylor Rapp as that strong safety, but they paid him like a safety 2, safety 3. And it was kind of funny how it worked out. Like they knew they were going to take Cole Bishop and say, hey, whenever Cole Bishop is ready, you're automatically demoted to safety 3.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I think they'll have different packages for all these guys who might see some more dime, but I think those are your top 3 safeties. They still have Cam Lewis and DeMar. So I feel like the room is pretty set. The one safety, and specifically free safety here, that I think that they could bring into the room is Micah Hyde. Because I think if he says that he wants to come back, that's the guy that you say, we will make a spot for you. Whether it's getting rid of one of those wide receivers or getting rid of D. Delaney, I think that the Bills are giving Micah the proper amount of time that he needs to actually make a decision. And what I think could actually happen is that Micah will say, I don't necessarily want to go through all the OTAs and training camp, but if you get to the end of training camp and you need a body, or even if you get into the season and someone gets hurt and you need someone, call me. I'll be ready. So Micah Hyde might not be one of those post June 1st signings, but I feel like there is quietly a roster spot for Micah Hyde, especially with Mike Edwards' shoulder being banged up. So I think it's more likely that the Bills bring back Micah Hyde than bringing in someone like a Justin Simmons.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm just looking at, I would totally agree with that. Micah Hyde makes a lot of sense. He's got the inside track. He can just step in and go. I think he should retire if I don't want to speak on another man's life or whatnot, predicament or situation. I just see that he plays a physical brand of football, and it seems like his body isn't there for him to play that brand of football anymore. So that's my biggest thing. And you would hate to see him have to go off the field and affect his life outside of football. So he's played a lot of good years as it is. He's given us a ton, but the way he plays football, I just think that it's best for him to to move on, and whatever he decides is obviously his decision, and would welcome him back with open arms. Just a matter of you know when you're looking at a guy's life outside of football, just would love for that to remain intact and not have to be affected. But again, I agree. Some of the people are in the comments saying that they would take Simmons. That's the point I'm making, is Simmons he's the best available at the position we need the most. So that's where I would take him. I think we're set on the strong safety builds and the types that can be in the box there. And so Simmons coming in at free safety makes the most sense for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it does make sense. I just think that it's more likely that Micah Hyde would come back and resume that role that he's had for 7 years now. And I
Mhm.
made this point last week, and that is I think that we could have like a Lorenzo Alexander type of situation where he says, I'm retired, but I'm going to stay in shape. And if you need me, call me. And the Bills never did sign or re-sign, I should say, Lorenzo Alexander, and he actually retired. Part of me still thinks like years down the road, I'm like, I wonder if Lorenzo's still in shape. Like whenever I see him, like he's just built. But
Yeah, I saw him at a season ticket member event last summer, I think it was, and yeah, still looked great. Signed a photo for my son and stuff like that. Yeah, even because I've been around Stevie Johnson a bit, and you just saw him recently. Like those guys are just incredible athletes. They're still way above what we see on a regular basis. So you kind of like, man, this guy looks like he could still go. When talking about Stevie, even I've seen him running routes and doing things, and I was able to film him doing a couple routes and things with his man Rich, Coach Rich there. So it just watching him do that stuff is like, man, it feels like he could still go out on Sundays and maybe make an impact, but just different level when you're at the NFL level.
I'm glad you brought up Stevie because let me plug this right now. As of now, Steve will be coming on Going Deep Buffalo next Wednesday. I've been communicating with him about that, and he wants to come on and break down the Bills wide receiver room. So I know we've been talking about it a lot, but hopefully now you can hear it from a former wide receiver one, should I say, hear it from
Mhm.
his perspective and get some interesting takes on that.
And
So
he's going to have a lot of good insight on the guys that are kind of you're talking about at the back end of this depth chart at wide receiver coming in with maybe even some of the UDFA guys you talked about uh, that may be have an outside chance in your mind, but Xavier Johnson and Lawrence Keys and those kind of guys, and even Chase Claypool and stuff like that. I think he'll have a good perspective on how those guys may be able to make an impact here.
all right, so the final subtopic, I guess. I mean, we've been talking about this. Well, there we go. You know where I'm going with this, Lance. So after all that is said and done, I don't see any other positions getting addressed here. Again, maybe defensive end, maybe the Bills bring back Micah Hyde. But the one that I think is almost a glaring hole is boundary corner 4. And I know that might not seem that big, but what we saw last year in the playoffs where the Bills were down to Kyer Elam and what was it, Jamarcus Ingram? Like, are we really comfortable rolling with that again? Maybe Dane Jackson played that game, but now Dane's in Carolina. Trey White signed with the Rams. And you could say, well, you replaced Trey White with Russell Douglas. And that is true. But where we finished the season, Trey White was that corner 3, corner 4 on the depth chart. And then after him and Dane signed elsewhere, you're looking at Kyrie Elam and Jamarcus Ingram again. And the Bills didn't draft a boundary corner. They did get Daquan Hardy, but he's more of that nickel corner, and he's going to help with special teams. So I think this is one position where the Bills could take, let's just say, $3 to $5 million and sign that boundary corner, because I feel like you would want to get someone who can not only help from a roster standpoint, but I think you want to get someone who can help Kyer Elam, because I think you want to get a running mate for him that is a little bit more experienced than Jamarcus Ingram, because Kyer Elam has faced a lot of flack so far. He's been underwhelming, I guess. I'm still pretty high on him, but considering where the Bills drafted him, they traded up to get him, and now he's not even starting. And he's been circulating around in trade rumors. That's probably more of a social media trade rumor. Like, I don't think he's actually involved in those trade rumors. But the point is, Kyer Elam has not necessarily lived up to that draft hype. And maybe you could say, well, it's a system that the Bills play or whatever. But I think if you get a proven veteran in here to not only help that depth and the competition, but he can push Kyer Elam and he can be in his ear and be like, hey, kid, I'll take you under my wing. And I think someone who makes perfect sense for this is Patrick Peterson. Because Patrick Peterson, I don't know, because I don't know what he's asking for, but I can't see him asking for a lot at this point of his career. He's going to be 34 years old. He's definitely seen better days, but I think he still has a lot of juice in the tank. He was a Pro Bowler and an All-Pro in Arizona all those years. Then he went to Minnesota and had 2 really solid years, especially in 2022. He started all 17 games, made 66 tackles, and he picked off 5 passes. And then he started 16 of the 17 games that he played in Pittsburgh last year and 42 tackles, 2 interceptions. And again, is this guy going to be a top 10 corner in the league? No. But I think for what I said, he will not only provide that depth and competition, but he will also be that experience, that veteran leader that Kaiir Elam needs to take him to the next level.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think that I would go with a guy who's a couple years younger and Steven Nelson maybe uh, versus Peterson, but I definitely that veteran type, that 30-something-year-old guy who can come in and still contribute when needed, if needed, is a necessity. And it's not to disrespect Jamarcus Ingram and say he couldn't play a role here. It's just a matter of, how much can you trust it? It's like we've just been depleted so far. We ask our defensive backs to come up and hit people so much in this defense that it just takes a toll, and we need more bodies. And I think that's your point is the brand of football this defense rolls out and the way the defensive backs have to step in and make plays uh, consistently. Look, we play a 2 linebacker base defense. So if the defensive, you have 5 defensive backs on the field typically anyway, and it's just by chance those guys are going to be the ones making the tackle should the defensive line and linebackers not be able to. So I agree. I think that Patrick Peterson seems more like a name right now than it would be um, an effective signing, but I'd give it the chance. I'm not going to say no to it. The interesting one would be also hearing the reaction from him and the fan base if Stephon Gilmore was re-signed here and come back to Buffalo after such disrespect when he left Buffalo. I just would wonder how that press conference would go if he was re-signed here. What do you think about Stephon Gilmore reunion?
I'm going to say no, just because we've seen how greedy he's been in the past. And he's always like, show me the money. I'm a top 10 corner. Maybe he knows that he's not one of the best anymore. And you're not going to give him that Leonard Floyd type contract. Like, he's not going to get more than 10 million, is he? I mean,
No,
he might. There
I
might be
would.
a team that's crazy and throws a bunch of cash at him, but I'm not giving him that much.
Yeah, I wouldn't sign him at all. I just think it would be hilarious to see what that press conference would look like if they did have that. I have no uh, intention of speaking that into existence whatsoever, but I do agree that another body could be added there, and it would probably be beneficial. And Patrick Peterson or Steven Nelson, I think, would fit perfectly with this room.
I'm going to throw a few names out there, a few other names, I should say. Um, I think someone like Xavier Howard could also make a lot of sense because that could be a situation. Like I said, he is that experienced veteran who can be that running mate for Kaiir Elam. But the only problem that I have with that is he might want too much money, number one. And number two, he might think he's a couple years younger than Patrick Peterson. He might say, I'm way better than a corner 4. So he might want more playing time. But I think that could be interesting because he does fill the mold that I'm looking for here in this boundary corner. And that could be a case where we say, okay, you took one of our guys in Jordan Poyer. Well, you're playing chess. We're playing checkers. We're going to take one of your guys here in Xavier Howard. So I
Right.
think that could be interesting, but I don't know. I mean, if we're saying that Stephon Gilmore is going to want to get paid, I think Howard's definitely going to want to get paid as well.
Yeah, I don't see the top guys as much of an option because you're not going to want to pay top end corner money. And Christian Benford has been nothing short of uh, exceptional, I think, for where he was drafted. I think he's done just a fine job, and I don't see a need to try to replace a starter. Like you said, the role is a backup role. If you want to replace Kaiir Elam as CB3 and put him at CB4 and give a guy that spot, fine. Kair's working his tail off to earn more than that and to live up to the first round pick that he was. But hasn't shown it quite yet. And hopefully this season he can show us and that he's turned the corner and stuff. And, I had him on the Buffalo Blitz when Peter and I were doing that on Tuesdays. And I've been with him at different charity events along with Stevie Johnson. I think that, he's a great young man. He's got a great head on his shoulders and he's going to keep working. But that doesn't necessarily translate to being a starting caliber football player in the NFL. So we'll have to see how that all works out and shakes out. I think, again, saying this training camp is going to be exceptional to watch some of these guys compete for a job and for certain roles on this team.
Well, a few other names that I'm going to throw out there that I think could make sense. Cameron Sutton is available, but I think that he's a really good corner and he's going to want too much money. So to the points that we already
Starter,
made,
yeah.
JC Jackson, Adoree Jackson, they're also listed up there. I just don't think that it makes sense financially. So I think here are three names that the Bills could go after to provide that depth and be that running mate for Kyer Elam. Akella Witherspoon, who is 29 years old, most recently played with the Rams. Chandon Sullivan, he's going to be 28 in a few months, most recently played with the Steelers. And Trey Herndon, 28 years old from Jacksonville. He's been there since 2018. I believe he was an undrafted free agent. And I think Trey Herndon could be that perfect depth corner. He plays special teams, and I think he would have a role. And the one last point that I'm going to make here is that a Sean McDermott defense it's crucial that they have the defensive backs to really get this defense going. Maybe I shouldn't say that it starts on the outside, like everything starts up front, but I think it's very important that you have defensive backs, specifically corners, who know what they're doing. And that's why I think that the Bills could still go get someone, because if they want depth and competition for just about every position, like you said, this is no disrespect on Jamarcus Ingram. It's just that if you wanted depth and competition for, let's just say, Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis last year, then I can't see the Bills saying, nah, we're good with Jamarcus Ingram. Like, if you're trying to get depth and competition for someone like Stephon Diggs or Von Miller, then I think you're going to want to get that competition for Jamarcus Ingram.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to have competition. That's going to give us the best chance at success throughout this season. And with so many, with so much of a younger roster now, adding key veterans at these positions where you can help these guys along. I like the Trey Herndon idea a lot. That's a good name to put in the mix here.
Yeah, and one last thing I'll say is Walter says here, I don't agree that Elam isn't a starting caliber cornerback. Does anybody really think that? The question is, has been his fit more than his actual ability? So, I mean, that is kind of polarizing, because I'm under the impression that Elam's not going to start, right? Unless there's an injury. You have Rasul Douglas and Christian Benford. But I think that he is corner 3 because they want to work with him, especially with the new corners coach here in Jamil Adai. And I think they're not going to give up on him yet. And I think he starts as corner 3. But if you get someone like Patrick Peterson, then if Peterson outperforms him, like, the Bills will not be scared to say, okay, Elam, you're back to corner 4 because Patrick Peterson's outperforming you. I think that the mindset here, the goal, the idea behind the Patrick Peterson idea is that he would start as corner 4 and try to push Kyer Elam to continuing to grow and develop. But if he's not pushing him, and if Elam's not responding, then I think Peterson is still definitely a good enough player to take over as corner 3 and essentially demote Kyer Elam. But I think that's what you want, because we might have made this point already, but if you sign someone like a Stephon Gilmore or an Xavier Howard, that would essentially block that growth and development from Elam. And I don't know if the Bills want to do that. I think that's the reason why they didn't draft a corner. For as much as people are saying, oh, are they going to draft Cooper DeJean? I'm like, how can you draft a first-round corner? Because that means you're essentially giving up on Elam. So that's why I think we're going to see a mid to bottom tier addition here. But I think corner is definitely a position to look out for this weekend and beyond.
They did add one through the draft in Daquan Hardy. So they do have a guy come in with return ability that can come in. I'm not saying he's going to be CB3 or 4, but he is another guy that was put on the roster here via the draft. So young guy at that position. Not sure of his path to this roster, but he is another body that is worth mentioning and seeing, with a role in the return game, could he be a guy that they have in the reserves to say, okay, if you can be our returner, then you can also be CB4 or CB5.
And one final point here, Joey brings up a good point. He says there's going to be a lot more players out on the market as soon as mandatory camp starts. Just hold the money till then. Yeah, I mean, we're probably going to see a lot more cuts and transactions. So when we come back, this is a good way to end tonight. When Kevin and I come back next week, and hopefully Stevie Johnson as well, we will be able to talk more about this little free agency period, because we'll probably have some stuff to talk about. There's probably going to be some signings. There's going to be some cuts, some releases, maybe some trades. So we'll get to all that next week. But Lance, thank you again for coming in a pinch. I really appreciate it. Very good job coming in on, short notice. Good thing that you had your notes going already,
Yep.
and that you just stay up to date with this stuff in general, because you never know when you need a pinch hitter, right?
Yeah, stay ready so you don't have to get ready.
Do you have any final comments or questions before we sign off for tonight?
No, I appreciate the opportunity to come on the show and pinch hit here. It was a great time talking about this. I was really intrigued by, like I said, Joe Brady's press conference was very intriguing. It was good to see him so well poised and the way he carried himself in that conference. And I'm excited for this year. I think that, this roster as is good. And, certainly excited to see what they do. But training camp coming up is going to be electric. I think just seeing the amount of talent they have, and then the different competitions at all these different spots is going to be just intense. I think you're in for an exciting and entertaining training camp this year.
All right. And where can people find you? You guys are Friday nights is it 8?
Yep, Friday nights 8 on the Triple Coverage podcast with Scott Casson and Benjamin Shoup, and at Lance Nelson BIV on X or any other social media, really. Be sure to follow Built in Buffalo's social medias as well. I'm in and out of that as well, posting and things on the brand pages. So, go out and check it out. I will say, I guess if we have time for one more question, we just posted this. The Bills will win a Super Bowl in 2024 if blank has the best season of his career. What do you think about that, Kevin?
Who asked that question?
That was posted on the Built-in Buffalo as a question I pulled from notes of in the past here, and we posted it on the Built-in Buffalo X page. I'm sure we're going to get a graphic out on Facebook and Instagram. So,
So the Bills will win the Super Bowl this year if blank has a very good year.
Has the best year of their career.
Oh, okay.
Josh Allen's too easy, right?
Josh Allen is too easy.
I'll give you my favorite answer to that question was Ed Oliver, because he's been in the league long enough to have produced some good seasons. But if he has that career year this year and takes it to the next level, I think that will have the most impact on the Bills' success.
I'm going to go off the grid here. And I thought about this right before I saw Walter's comment. Sean McDermott. If we can talk about the coach, I think that Sean McDermott would have to have the best season of his career, and he can't crumble on late game scenarios. The defense can't crumble. We can't have any lapses. I think that if the Bills would win the Super Bowl, that means McDermott has to be at the top of his game, because when Josh Allen is at the top of his game, a lot of crazy things can happen in, I guess, a good way or a bad way. But for the most part in the playoffs, when Josh Allen is on his A game, then a lot of good things happen to this team. But coaching has held this team back. So to answer the question, I'm going to say that Sean McDermott would have to have the best year of his career.
Love it. Yeah, people are saying Joe Brady. I think, you got to have guys who have enough time in the league to have put together some successful seasons. And that's where I think maybe a Claypool, Joe Brady, or like any of the rookies. I like James Cook too. I think, because of that two-dimensional approach that we're looking at having this season, if James Cook has an even better year than last year, even though he's fairly young, I think he gives the Bills another a good, impact if he has a career year this year. And then I also said Connor McGovern on offense could be a guy where if he has the best year of his career, that puts us really good on the offensive line, and that's going to have a major impact at center.
I would say Kincaid. Like if I had to choose a player, I know it's a small sample size because you're going into year two, but to the points that we made tonight about how we
Mhm.
think this offense is going to work, I think you need Kincaid to really pop off, have 1,000 yards plus, 7, 8. I mean, is 10 touchdowns too much? Because in the red zone, Josh Allen's legs are a threat. But I think that if the Bills were to win the Super Bowl, like you would need all pro numbers from Dalton Kincaid. So I guess
Yeah.
my first answer is Sean McDermott. My second answer is Kincaid. And then if I had to go with a player on defense, I would probably go with Von Miller just because that's why the Bills signed him. Like he needs to be that finisher and he needs to get back to, again, not the old Von Miller, but we have to see some more effort from him. So those would be my three answers. The biggest seasons, again, off the top of my head, Sean McDermott, Dalton Kincaid, Von Miller.
Nice. And I went Ed Oliver. I also threw in Epinesa or Rasul Douglas and cheated a little bit and threw in a couple other players. But I favorite idea is Ed Oliver and then also James Cook on offense. So James Cook offensive favorite and Ed Oliver favorite on defense.
All right. Well, there you have it. Thank you again, Lance, for coming on. Thank you to all of our viewers tonight. Thank you to all of our sponsors. Make sure you check out Lance's show Friday night, as well as all of our other shows here on the Built in Buffalo Network. As Kevin Massare and I will be back with you next Wednesday at 8 o'clock. Again, hopefully, we will have Stevie Johnson on to break down the wide receiver room. So, with that, we'll see what the Bills do this weekend. Maybe we'll have a big edition to talk about, maybe a mid tier edition, or maybe just a bottom tier edition, or nothing at all. And we'll continue to make some predictions. But either way, thank you again and go Bills.
Go Bills.